Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Aaron Newcomb joins me. We're going to talk about Pinto, a way for you to have your own Perl CPAN, one of your very own. That sounds really cool. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb. Episode 246, recorded March 27th, 2013. Pinto. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week, or as often as I can make it, the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the small projects, projects you might not have heard of, projects that might be very important to you in the future, projects maybe that are already important to you in the present or the past or something like that. I guess it includes just about everything. Anyway, coming to you live, well, if you're watching the stream live, coming to you live, but often probably delayed by digital media from the 13th floor of the Howard Hughes Center in downtown LA. No, not downtown LA, close to LAX. That's about as ambiguous an opening as I can make, so I'm just going to save it by going immediately to my co-host, Aaron Newcomb. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here. Oh, you can also call me Lobot today because I've got my Lobot connectivity, so I can actually talk to Cloud City as we're doing the interview today. Awesome,
awesome. Well, you know, if you get distracted with any of that, just let me know. Give me a hand signal or whatever, and I'll take over the feed for a second. So that'll be great that way. So we have a really interesting guest today. The guest today is someone who has actually been on the show before, Jeff Thalheimer, who's been on the show before, talking about Perl Critic, which, if you don't remember the show, you can go back and watch it. It's show number 189. The Perl Critic is like lint for Perl. It basically goes through your Perl code, statically analyzing it and figuring out what's broken with it. But he's got a whole new project he's been working on for the past few months. And he wrote me and said, I've got this new thing. I want to be on the show again. I said, sure. And it's called Pinto. And Pinto manages the CPAN for you. It's the CPAN is the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network, and it includes all the things you would install in your Perl installation to add extra functionality. And the CPAN is basically Perl's, golden gem. What's the phrase? The thing, the crown jewel. There we go, golden gem. Where did I get that from? The crown jewel of Perl, because there's like literally tens of thousands of ready-to-install modules that all have dependencies listed properly, and it gets updated huge every day, more and more so as time goes on, which also tells me there's more people doing Perl today than there was doing even the .com boom. It's just a smaller piece of the pie, and that's why everybody thinks Perl's dead. But no, a lot more stuff's happening in Perl every day than everything like that. And so what Pinto does is a couple of things. It sort of manages your local view of the CPAN so that you can freeze modules at a certain release and things like that. But you can also inject your own local modules. So you have one-stop shopping for your internal projects, because every project that does anything non-trivial with Perl has local modules that they've created. And you have to have a way of sort of installing all of that in your distributions for use internally. I think that's a pretty good way of describing Pinto. Have you looked at this much, Aaron?
I haven't looked at it, but I am interested because I used to do some Perl programming, and I had to go through all these crazy steps to try to get it all to work. So it sounds like this would work for someone that had similar problems with weird modules showing up at different revision levels and so forth. So I'm excited to see how easy it is to put together and how it all works.
So let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Jeff Thalheimer. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Randall.
Great, great. And where are you speaking to us from? Looks like a garage.
That's right. I'm in my garage here in San Francisco. This has become my home office now that I have kids.
Awesome stuff. So Perl's my area of expertise. I think I gave a pretty good description of what Pinto is about. But let's start with the 30,000 foot level view from you. What is Pinto about, and what problem does it solve?
So Pinto, in a nutshell, is a tool for creating custom repositories of Perl modules. Oh, there's the garbage truck.
It's okay. Keep going.
So it solves one of the problems that vexes a lot of Perl programmers when it comes to managing their dependencies, because the CPAN, albeit the crown jewel in the Perl community, it suffers from what you might call some design flaws that make it a little less usable than you might like.
Let's back up for a second. So a lot of our audience are probably familiar with the CPAN, but I bet a lot of them aren't because they grew up in a Ruby world or a Java world. Why don't you step back and tell us what the CPAN is and why it's important to the Perl community?
So the CPAN stands for the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network. Not exactly sure when it was started or who started it, but it is a repository where the entire Perl community contributes all of their open source work. It differs from other communities that have multiple repositories for their open source contributions, in that with the Perl community, there is one de facto place to go. So that makes it very easy to find everything that you could possibly want.
And that's a pretty good thing. And actually, just to kind of give your head around what's actually going on here, I think there's something like 40,000 distributions inside the CPAN. And back in the .com boom, there were probably 20 or 30 uploads a day to the CPAN. And I just checked this morning, and there was something like 110 uploads to the CPAN just yesterday. And that actually affects what you're doing with Pinto, right? This is part of the problem that Pinto is solving, because all those uploads, well, you go ahead and tell the story.
Well, that's exactly right. CPAN is growing rapidly. There are different comparisons between what constitutes a release in Perl land versus Ruby land. So the metrics kind of fluctuate. But there is a large and rapidly accelerating number of modules in CPAN. That number is getting bigger and bigger every day. And that creates a problem, because one of the deficiencies of the CPAN model is that dependencies are not hardened. So when you declare that your application requires version 2 of foo, that's sort of ambiguous. You will end up getting version 2 or later. And CPAN authors are free to add and remove modules all the time. So this gets to the crux of the problem that Pinto solves. When you point your installer client at CPAN and ask to install a bunch of modules, you never know what you're going to get from one day to the next. So for those of us that care a lot about consistency, and we want to be able to rebuild our application over and over and over again and get exactly the same output every time, and this is happening more and more in cloud space, where we tend to spin up servers all the time. We need to be able to build everything up from bare metal and get a predictable outcome. So Pinto attempts to solve this instability problem.
And how does it accomplish that?
So it kind of works around the problem. Honestly, the real solution to it is to build something into the Perl toolchain that respects hardened dependencies. So when you ask for version 2 of foo, you get precisely that. But that requires extending that whatever feature that is, extending that out to every module that's out there, and there are thousands of them. So embedding them into code that's already been released is just infeasible. So Pinto gets around the problem by instead allowing you to create your own little CPAN with exactly the versions of the modules that you want in it. And so you can control when things get upgraded or downgraded. And you just point your CPAN installer at your own Pinto repository, which looks exactly like a CPAN repository under the hood. And from there, you can build your application, and you'll get exactly the same versions of the same modules every time.
And so instead of having like the traditional CPAN, which would have, say, whatever the developer considers the current release plus maybe 5 or 10 back releases, or for some people like 200 back releases I've seen, you only have just one version of each module then?
So that's a really good point. One of the a typical CPAN has, as you said, maybe the latest version of something plus the last 3 or 4 that the author has released. And then on top of that, there's an index file which is what resolves a module name to the actual physical archive that you have to download and install to get that module. And the index usually almost always only maps the latest version of the module to an archive. So it will only tell you how to get the latest version of something. Pinto is a little bit different in that it can have multiple versions of these indexes. So on top of one pile of distributions, tar-GZs, which are how Perl modules get distributed, you can have many of these indexes so that you can, theoretically, your repository can have many different versions of these modules and many different versions of entire trees of dependencies. And then depending on what URL you use to point at your repository, you can get different views of those dependencies. So you could have a production slice, a development slice, and in the Pinto lingo, these things are called stacks. They're stacks of dependencies.
So I don't have to have a repository duplicated for production and the same modules copied over somewhere else for development that might be slightly different or slightly ahead of the production one. They actually can all live in the same file tree. You're just moving the indexes around?
That's correct. All the archives live in the same big pile, and then they're connected to the different stacks through symlinks. A CPAN repository under the hood is really just a couple of directories with this index file. It's quite simple and quite elegant, actually. So we can sort of mock that and present these multiple index views just by using some symlinks and some extra index files.
So how did Pinto get started? What motivated you to spend some of your spare waking hours working on this?
So I had built custom CPANs for about 3 or 4 different clients. I didn't come up with the idea originally. I was actually somewhat inspired by you, and you were the first, I think, to write about mirroring the tip of CPAN.
Yeah.
I think it was in one of the Linux World magazines. You had cooked up some quick script to get the latest versions of CPAN, and so you could have your own little private mini mirror of it. Mm-hmm. So that was the first attempt I'm aware of actually sort of using a private CPAN, even though at the time it was only committed. It was what you had done was devoted towards just mirroring what's publicly available.
Yes.
Over the years, people have extended that idea a bit and made it possible to add your own modules to this private CPAN. There are things like CPAN inject and CPAN site, which try to do that. And I had used those in several different shops to try and construct in-house CPAN repositories, because the CPAN tool chain, it's really excellent. It's a really excellent way to distribute code in-house. Even if you're not shipping your code out as open source, it's still a really good way to unwind dependencies, build and test Perl software. So using it in-house was a really sensible thing to do. And all the existing tools for doing that, I wasn't very satisfied with them, because you always had to wire them up with some kind of hacky shell script, or they felt very purpose-specific and very tailor-made for each environment. About 1.5 years ago, Genentech hired me to do yet another one of these private CPANs for their environment. And they were pretty progressive, and they gave me an opportunity to basically start from scratch and do whatever I wanted. And that's where Pinto was born. The terms of the deal with them were that I would release this, whatever I did, I would release as open source software. So that project went on for about 6 months, and I've continued to work on Pinto ever since then.
That's pretty progressive, actually, of Genentech. I commend them for that. If the companies that get big value out of open source often see the need to return some food to the picnic, as it were. You know, you don't just take food from the picnic, you actually try to bring food to it as well. And it sounds like Genentech was doing the right thing there.
That particular department was a big consumer of Perl. They're very active in the community there. It is truly rare to see that. I wish it happened more often, but my hat goes off to them.
Indeed, indeed. And just to give a little bit of history on my side of the equation, since you mentioned the thing that I created, the mini CPAN, I was actually writing an article. I was heading to Australia for the first time, and I wanted to be able to install modules, even though I might not have good connectivity in Australia. And I said, wait a second, I can't mirror the whole CPAN. This is back when disk was really precious. So I said, I can't mirror the whole CPAN, but at least I can mirror like the bleeding edge of it so that I can install it and get things to happen at 30,000 feet or when I was in bad connectivity in Australia. And from that, I created the mini CPAN creator. And I don't know who took it. Whoever created CPAN Mini then took it and modularized it and turned it into a script that became part of the CPAN. I was really, tickled pink. I was pleased to find out that somebody had actually gone forward with that. Because of all the columns I've wrote, I would tend to write the code for the column. And then, of course, the code isn't owned by me anymore because it's copyright by the people who were paying me for the column. If I'd only written it as code and released the CPAN first, then wrote a column about it, there'd be a lot more things for me in the CPAN. I've only have like 5 things in CPAN because it was all written as code columns instead. Darn me, I got the only timing wrong and all that stuff. But I'm glad somebody was also able to actually take that and be inspired by it. So how does Pinto then differ from these other tools you mentioned, like CPAN-like and Inject and stuff? Where does Pinto go further?
So Pinto goes further in that it's sort of an all-in-one tool. It's designed to fit right into your workflow as an application that you use. The others they have an application front end, especially mini CPAN, but they tend to be more of like a library type thing that you integrate into your environment through either writing more Perl scripts or connecting it up with other libraries. Pinto is more of an application. The fact that it's actually written in Perl is kind of immaterial. It's this opaque thing that you use, just like Subversion or Git, to manage Perl modules. And where it goes further is like I said, it has this notion of multiple stacks. So you can have different views on your repository of modules that correspond to either different phases of development, QA, production, et cetera, or you could have different views for different projects that you're working on. Another application is you could have different views or different stacks that correspond to different versions of Perl. So if you ship your application to different environments, whether they be different OSs or just different flavors of Perl, you might want to ship your application with slightly different versions of modules. For example, you might depend on foo version 1 in Windows because you know that foo version 2 doesn't work there. But it does work on a Linux platform. So you would have a different stack for Linux that has foo version 2 there. So that's one way that they differ. Pinto is also designed for team development. In a sense, it's another form of version control. It's a centralized repository where an entire team can contribute the modules that they author themselves and also the dependencies that they want to use and pull down from CPAN. And it's a really robust command line. Most of all, I put a lot of work into making it, having a good user experience and making it actually kind of fun to use. So all the kinds of things that you would ever want to do with a version control system, a lot of them you can do with a Pinto repository as well.
So I was just wondering, back when I used to do Perl, one of the problems I had was not all the servers that I was running my scripts on had access to the internet. So I'm wondering if not only Pinto, but some of these other things that we've talked about would solve that problem as well. In other words, they could use Pinto as an internal repository to get their, to download the modules from.
That's exactly right. So if you live in a sort of a sysadmin world where they're pretty restrictive about what machines can talk to the outside world and what can be installed on them, which is becoming less common now that in the DevOps world, but there's still a lot of shops that operate that way, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're in that kind of world, what you can have is a Pinto repository inside your firewall that is someplace where these machines can connect to. And someone with some authority can decide what modules go in there. And it's a way of blessing the versions of the modules that your organization feels are safe or acceptable in your environment. And it's a way of distributing them back out to whoever wants them within the organization. And I should have mentioned earlier, you install modules from your Pinto repository just using the standard CPAN tool. So anybody who has Perl can pull stuff out of a Pinto repository. They themselves don't need the Pinto tools at all.
Well, and that's a good segue. I was just going to ask, how do you set this up? How do you start? So I'm guessing you need a component on a server level, and then you need to point all of your hosts to that particular server as a Pinto, or as a CPAN repository.
So the most dead simple way to deploy it is as a directory on some disk somewhere, and as long as that directory is readable from wherever it is that you want to deploy your code, it'll all work. In other words, it works over a file URL. That's the simplest way to do that. There are some problems with that, in that you're exposed to all the same kind of security issues that you have whenever you're basically sharing files. You have to worry about people being in the right groups and having permission to read and write files on disk and things like that. So the next level of sophistication above that is to deploy a Pinto repository on any old server that you want. And then there is a Pinto server, which is just a simple plaque-based server that can sit on top of that. And it serves two purposes. One, it accepts commands from the Pinto tools over the wire so that you can add and reindex and look at the logs and do all the Pinto-y things that a repository can do. And it also serves up the distributions for CPAN clients. So when you point CPAN, the CPAN installer or CPAN- or whatever you like to use at the URL that this Pinto server is listening on, and away you go.
Right. So can you expand a little bit on the Pinto-y tools, the Pinto-y things? What are the tools, what are the various tools that you would use to interoperate or talk to Pinto?
So there are stacks I mentioned. So creating stacks it's one of the common operations. Probably even more common than that is the pull command. And what the pull command does is it says, I want, what's your favorite module, Aaron?
The database one, DBS, DMS?
DBI.
DBI?
DBI, thank you.
Sure. And you say Pinto pull DBI. And so what that Pinto will do then is it will go out to CPAN and fetch DBI, or actually the archive that contains the DBI module, unwind its dependencies, and fetch all of them recursively and so on and so forth until it has everything in your repository, until your repository has everything that you would need to build DBI from there. And then you can just continue this process for the rest of your application's dependencies. In fact, if you're organizing your code in a CPAN style distribution where your dependencies are declared as prereqs in your meta, what you would do is you would just ship your finished application to Pinto, and Pinto would then unwind its dependencies and fetch everything that it needs to build your application from that point. So those are two of the most common operations. Pull, which is to get stuff down from CPAN, and add, which is to inject your own local distributions that you've built. And they don't just have to be private code that you've made. Another application for private CPANs is when you find a module in the wild that's broken somehow. And maybe you can't get the author to patch it, or for whatever reason, you decide to go ahead and you want to make a local patch of yourself, a local patch for yourself. And then you can just squirt that into your Pinto repository. And now you have a fixed version of DBI or whatever CPAN module you were using. Pinto also functions as a bit of a version control system. So it keeps snapshots of the index after every operation. So you can review what has changed over time. You can go back and see, you can go back to a previous state of the index if you want. And every time you do one of these operations like pull or add, you leave a commit message. Pinto will generate one for you that's kind of semi-helpful, but I'm hoping that people will write more detailed information in these log messages other than, upgraded DBI. Anyway, so since it's a version control system, there are some version control system-like commands in Pinto. One is log. So you can see an annotated log that looks almost identical to Git, to the output from Git, that describes every change that a stack has gone through. There's a diff command, which will compare two stacks and will show you how they're different, which versions of which modules have been added or removed on either stack. What else can you do? Oh, there's just a simple list command, which is to just show you what's in the stack. What would the index look like right now? So those are some of the Pinto-y type things that you can do.
Great. So you said you could have multiple stacks. How does the client know which stack it's hitting? How do I tell, does Pinto manage that?
So there's a couple different things going on there. So each stack boils down to a subdirectory inside of your Pinto repository. So when you point a CPAN client at your Pinto repository, you end up adding on like one or two directories to the URL to actually end up pointing to the particular stack that you want to get stuff from. There's also a notion of a default stack, which is the stack that appears at the sort of very top of your Pinto repository. It's what you would get if you pointed your installer at the root of the Pinto repository rather than one of these stack subdirectories down below. And that's just accomplished through a symlink. You can change the default stack at any time, or you can have no default stack if you choose.
So that's really nice. So basically it's in the URL, in the server URL that I put into CPAN, that last directory would be the stack that I want to hit against.
Right, and the stack can and should have a descriptive name like QA or release 1.598 or something that says how that stack is different from all the other stacks.
Yeah. So is this all done from command line?
That's correct. It's all Pinto is just a command line tool. There are some plugins for Diskzilla as well, but I'm a command line junkie, so it all happens there.
Is there any plans to develop a GUI, or has anyone ever said, hey, I'll develop a GUI for you if you want?
The closest thing to a GUI, actually, is this thing called StrataPan, which is a web service that is built on top of Pinto. The idea is that Pinto repositories are really easy to set up, but they're still a bit of a hassle. It's a fairly large and sophisticated application. You have to make sure you've got, if you're going to set it up on a server, you've got to worry about uptime and making sure you've got disk space available and all that stuff. And so StrataPan is a hosted solution where you can basically set up your Pinto repositories in the cloud. And then there's a web UI on top of that where you can push these buttons to do the kinds of operations we just talked about, like adding and pulling. And then from your, you just point your CPAN client at your repository inside of StrataPan, which is floating around in the internet somewhere, and you build your application from there. So that is the closest thing to a GUI that we've come up with so far. But I still see Pinto as being primarily as a developer's command line kind of application.
Now, earlier you said that with Perl, you're basically following all the dependency chains and stuff. But what if I pull again, do I get more newer, updated versions of everything?
No. So the key to Pinto is that the dependencies can only change when you want to change them. So if you were to pull DBI today, you would get one set of things. And if you pull DBI again tomorrow, nothing would change. If you want to upgrade to a newer version of DBI, you have to ask Pinto to pull a particular version or better than what you have now. Mm-hmm. So that's how Pinto, whenever you ask Pinto to provide you with some kind of module, it defaults to just giving you what it already has, unless you explicitly say, no, I need something newer than that. So that way your repository stays stable. It only has the things that you absolutely need, and they don't change until you say, I really want something different.
Can I downgrade a version as well?
You can. You can upgrade, downgrade, remove completely. You can go in any direction you want. Another interesting feature of Pinto that none of the other tools have is this notion of a pin. A lot of times you'll find that a version of something in the wild breaks your application. And so you want a way of signaling that you can't accept a new version of that. So let's use DBI as an example. Let's say the current state of the art is version 1.0. You try your application with 2.0 and it breaks. So now you want to prevent DBI 2.0 from ever entering your repository. Now that could happen in a couple of ways. One is somebody could just deliberately request a new version of DBI. In that case, you would just sort of yell at them over the wall and say, hey, everybody, don't install DBI 2.0. That's okay, but a more common problem is some other dependency that your application has wants a new version of DBI 2.0. And we usually don't pay attention to the dependencies that exist more than 1 or 2 levels down from what our application uses. So in that situation, what we can do is we can put a pin in our Pinto repository that says, don't let DBI change from version 1.0 on this stack. And so if anybody happens to try to install or upgrade something that wants a newer version of DBI, it'll puke and say, nope, you can't have that because it requires something that we're not allowed to have. And so at that point, you either figure out what's wrong with DBI 2.0 or maybe something's wrong with your application. You sort it out, and then you unpin it, and then you can go forward with the upgrade.
Okay, so, and also as you're pulling all these dependencies, it's just a static analysis of whatever the CPAN authors have told you in the YAML files and whatever else generates that information. You aren't actually trying to build all these things and making sure the dependencies actually build and play well together.
That's right. Pinto doesn't know anything about what actually happens on the install end of things, which makes the dependency analysis not entirely accurate. Perl is this insanely dynamic language, so what it actually takes to build and test an application isn't really known until you build and test it. Pinto doesn't build or test anything. It just looks at what's inside what's statically declared inside the archive, as you said. So it's possible that you might pull something into your Pinto repository, but when you turn around and go and install it from your Pinto repository into an actual deployment environment, some things will be missing, like some Win32 specific module that you might need if you're deploying to Windows. So as you said, it's static, which leads to a somewhat incomplete analysis of dependencies, and occasionally you have to go probing around and pull in specific things to make the dependency stack complete.
It'd be interesting if you could somehow also record dependencies with, say, operating system packages that need to be installed, because maybe you need lib foo for this particular Perl module, maybe a way of recording that so as that goes around and tries to install that, it can also install lib foo. I don't know if that's in the cards or whether that's even doable.
Well, that's an interesting segue into another topic, which is how Pinto stacks up against OS vendor packaging tools. But I know that there's been a lot of work on the alien packaging for Perl, so that you could ship Perl modules that have any sort of external libraries installed, shipped with them, whether they're like libxml or libfoo, like you described. So there is an effort to sort of make a general way to ship Perl applications with foreign libraries in them. I think that's mostly outside of the scope of Pinto, though. Pinto doesn't really care what's in the distribution as long as it looks like a Perl distribution.
Is there any sort of tools to analyze, say, at one time I need a DBI, but I no longer need it, what I can remove from one of my stacks? Or do I just start over with a new stack and just add the things I want to add?
So Pinto does know about another garbage truck. Pinto does know about all the dependencies for all the modules that you pull into it. So it keeps track of who depends on what. And the tool doesn't exist yet, but the data is there to analyze and say, all right, which things am I no longer using? What things can I prune from my stack? The answer to that question, it depends on how you use Pinto. If you just use Pinto to pull the dependencies that your application requires, then you might not really get a good answer, because there isn't like a single point of entry to the stack, right? There isn't a single master application in the stack that points to all the things that it needs. If you're not shipping your application to Pinto itself, then Pinto really has no sense of where that route is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
But there are some interesting things that I think that Pinto can still do with this dependency information. For example, it can analyze your stack at any point and tell you if it thinks you actually have sufficient packages to build what's in that stack. It's possible that over time you might delete or remove or downgrade things in your stack, and ending up with a stack that is basically unbuildable. So Pinto can tell you about that ahead of time.
It'd be interesting, I don't know if you have this already, but interesting if you have a tool that you would point it at a program and in a brand new empty Pinto repository, and it would continually try to recompile the program and look at all the error messages of what it couldn't find, use Pinto to pull them down and CPAN-M to install them and retry it again do it repeatedly until the thing works.
Well, something similar to that I've been working on is a lot of shops that I've worked at really have no idea what their environment is. It's something that's been sort of accreted and monkey patched over the years, and it just has a bunch of Perl modules that nobody could really identify. There isn't a canonical list of stuff to build for their environment. So that puts them in a tight spot, right? If they wanted to change operating systems or upgrade to a different version of Perl, they have no idea what they would need to build. So what we can do with that is, or what we've been working on is a tool that would maybe analyze your environment, basically look through all the PM files in your @inc path, and figure out which distributions you would need to install to come up with that environment, and then possibly build a Pinto repository out of it for you. So it's a way of reverse engineering your environment, which is kind of like what you were describing, although a slightly different use case.
Well, that's really interesting, because I know that, there's a lot of code bases out there, especially the ones I've been called in to consult on the last few years, that are legacy. I mean, everybody that wrote the code is long gone on other things. And so these new junior programmers are all hacking with it, but they don't really understand sort of the old school knowledge that somehow got lost in the mythology of over time. And so it sounds like a tool like you're talking about would be really interesting to be able to go back and say, okay, we have a bunch of modules we've installed. Do we really need to install these on all our new machines, or can we limit ourselves to something that's a lot more sane? So if you've got that kind of tooling, that sounds like it might be really useful especially on legacy code.
Yeah, it's the cruft problem is definitely there. It wasn't until fairly recently that installing Perl modules was sort of a convenient thing to do. The CPAN tool was always there, but configuring it was kind of a pain. It tended to install things into the system Perl, which required root privileges. So all of those factors sort of contributed to a lot of accumulation of Perl cruft in these legacy applications. With things like CPAN-, it's now a lot easier to sort of to build a tight little package of Perl modules for your application, and without having to get tangled up with the system Perl and other modules used by other applications and so forth. And Pinto, yeah, sort of sits on top of that and can give you a canonical list of these are the actual things that you're using, which has another interesting application with StratoPan. To tie it back into that, one of the real frustrations with CPAN is knowing what's good. CPAN is kind of a victim of its own success. It has grown so much that it's often hard to find out what is the ideal module for a particular task that you're trying to accomplish. And one way to measure that is to keep track of who uses what. Now, that's hard to do in CPAN being distributed because there are many mirrors. There's no one place to keep track of how many times DBI gets downloaded. But StratoPan, if it had a large enough sort of a fairly good sample of users creating private repositories in the cloud, StratoPan has some visibility then into what modules people actually use. What do they put in their stack? And from that, it can help maybe produce some kind of metric about what the actual usage or popularity of certain modules are, and that can help contribute to finding a better match for whatever you're looking for in CPAN.
Sorry about that. So my mic was off. I'm kind of curious, is Pinto an acronym? Where did Pinto, the name Pinto, come from?
So I don't know. The Pinto came out of nowhere. There was, the last few years, people have given up on naming their modules after the implementation. Like, I don't know. The config : with SSL and encryption or something like that. There's just, those names are just really uninteresting. And you start to run out of them quickly. So people just started coming up with random names for things like carton or Pinto or plaque. These things are just sort of arbitrary and not necessarily associated with the actual implementation of the code. It's actually, Pinto was a name that I used for my son. Can you see him there? Wesley, there he is. That's him.
He's over there somewhere. I can't see him. But...
Wesley and his girlfriend Freya were scribbling on the wall. But yeah, I sometimes call him Pinto Bean. So in a way, it's named after him.
Cool. You mentioned StratoPan a couple times. I went out to stratopan.com, and then I got a big warning that said, this is under development, things don't work. What is StratoPan? Is that designed to be a service that people pay for to have you manage all this stuff and give them easy tools to interface to it?
Right. So StratoPan is still kind of a alpha thing, proof of concept right now, but the idea is to provide a service for hosting Pinto repositories. So in the same way that we tend to hire GitHub or CollabNet or Bitbucket to host source code repositories for us, the idea with StratoPan is to provide hosting for Pinto repositories. And as I said before, setting up a Pinto repository is not hard, just like setting up a Git server is not hard. But if you can toss a few bucks at somebody and not have to worry about uptime or disk space or anything like that, it's almost hard. It doesn't make sense not to. the convenience of these hosted services is just so much. They're just so easy to use now that it doesn't make sense not to use them. So I'm trying to apply the same thinking to Pinto repositories.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense because I think a lot of businesses just don't want to be bothered with it. And like you say, someone, a developer may come in and want to use Pinto or depend on Pinto, and then his contract runs up and he leaves and no one knows anything about it or how it works. So by having a service that manages that, it takes a little bit of the risk out of it for businesses, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So it puts your dependency stack hopefully in a very visible and shared space rather than it being stashed away in somebody's home directory or something like that. Although if that is the case, you probably have something more wrong with your development culture in the first place. But
so what's
yeah,
coming up for?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what's coming up for Pinto? What new things do you have on the roadmap, if any?
So Pinto has finally reached a point of stability right now. The first many releases all tended to break compatibility, and I am so grateful to those early adopters who suffered through that with me. But right now, Pinto has finally kind of reached a plateau. I'm not going to say that it's bug free or anything like that, but it's at a point where you can actually start using it in earnest. And repositories that you make with it now will, if there's some kind of format change in the future, there will be automatic hooks to migrate them. So I don't have a whole lot planned for Pinto itself right now. Most of my focus is on StrataPan and building the hosting service around that and experimenting with whether or not that's actually a viable business.
What does the community look like? We always like to try to bring in community and also where you're looking for help. I mean, do you have maintainers? I mean, I'm guessing if this is pretty much feature stable, if you will, that you probably don't need a lot of help. But do you get contributions from the community?
Oh, I absolutely do. Karen Etheridge early on was one of the first people to start using it, and she set up an IRC channel for Pinto. And I had never been a really big IRC user before, but that has actually become one of the main communication channels for Pinto. I do get pull requests from GitHub pretty regularly. I've got a decent list of open issues and closed issues as well. So there has been a fair bit of community involvement. And there definitely is an established user base, and I think it's growing. I expect it to grow anyway, now that it's actually reached a certain maturity. Those releases that were all breaking backward compatibility had a lot of big, nasty warnings on the front of them, which I think scared away a lot of potential people. But those warnings won't be there anymore. So
good. And if people do want to get involved, what's the best way to do that?
So if you want to get involved with Pinto, like I said, the Pinto IRC channel is one way to reach us, or submit issues through the GitHub repository, or just send emails to me, thaljeff at CPAN.org or jeff@stratapan.com.
Cool. I have a couple more quick questions, and we're just about out of time, so I want to make sure we get to everything that we wanted to get to. First off, if I'm like the smart Perl dude in a group of Perl dudes and gals, and I'm trying not to be offensive to anybody, but apparently I just was, to both groups. Okay, so I'm on a team. Let's do it that way, generic terms. I got a team, and I'm the smart Perl guy in there, and I want to set up and start using Pinto to manage our dependency management for this stuff. What's the sort of on-ramp for everybody else in the team? If they don't want to deal with any Pinto commands, is it just as simple as I tell them, here's the local URL that you want to point as your first hop in your CPAN list for CPAN-M or wherever way you want to install it? Is it that simple for them?
Well, it can be, as long as they're willing to abdicate all responsibility over what modules go into Pinto.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be pulling the knobs and levers to decide what modules get inside the repository. So somebody in the organization, the smart guy or gal, has to have the power to make those decisions.
Yeah.
If everybody else wants to just play dumb, or that's not the right word, be indifferent, then yeah, all they have to know is this is the URL where you point your CPAN installer when you want something.
So this is probably the most politically incorrect section of any part of any show I've done. I'm sorry, guys and gals. Oh boy. Okay, let's just stop that right now. All right, here we go. So we've gone through a lot of things. I'm checking my list real here to see if there's anything else I want to ask you about. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to make sure got said before we wrap the show up?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything. You were very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, I've got to ask my two questions. I know what the answer to one of them is. I definitely know the answer to one of them. What's your favorite scripting language? And don't answer that incorrectly.
Perl.
Yay! Yay! All right, one for my side.
I don't call it a scripting language, though.
Oh, sorry. Well, okay. Yeah, I do that just to avoid people doing really complex languages.
It's a language, just like any other. They're all good.
It is and is. Do you play much with other languages?
I've tried to branch out more. As I've been working on Stratapan, I've had to get more exposure to JavaScript and things like Node and other technologies. And I've been dabbling in Ruby. I've also written some Objective-C. So my experience is mostly with Pinto and a handful of other things. I'm sorry, mostly with Perl and a handful of other things.
Are you still working on Perl Critic?
I am. The thing I'm doing with that now is I'm trying to get that onto GitHub, actually. It's in a Subversion repository hosted by Tigris. And GitHub is where all the cool kids are now. I'm not a huge fan of Git, but I really do like GitHub. And I want to get the project in a place where it has a lot of visibility and people can contribute to it with ease, where there's really low barriers to entry for that. So we're trying to get the project over to GitHub. I don't have any big features or enhancements planned for Perl Critic right now. There's a huge queue of bugs I'd love to get some help with.
Cool. Well, you just put out the call for that. That's good. And a lot of people listening to this show, I'm sure, are also fans of Perl Critic. So thank you also for doing that. And the other question, of course, is your favorite text editor.
Sublime.
Okay. Well, all right. Not one of the two big ones we normally get, but that will work, I'm sure. Actually, I've been hearing that more and more. I may have to look into that someday. I've been hearing more and more about that particular editor, although I'm firmly ingrained in Emacs, and for reasons that will become obvious in a few minutes when we talk a little bit out in the post-show. But I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about Pinto. This looks exciting and interesting. Of course, I say that every week because I bring the best guests on. But I can see it actually solving some issues that we even have for a couple of my primary clients. So this is going to be a good thing. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Randall, and thank you, Aaron.
You bet.
Very good, very good. That was Jeff Thalheimer, who was talking to us about Pinto, and had been on the show before, talking about Perl Critic. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it certainly would have fixed some issues that I had back in the day when I was really heavy into writing some Perl stuff. And I think anyone that has dealt with Perl for a while really gets the problem of having multiple versions of modules that you can't control. And I mean, the need for this really becomes obvious very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and also having the local injection problem, because it's like, where do you put your local modules? And I know that we're doing it like here at NAMI, we have a local SVN tree that gets installed, and that's where the stuff gets checked out from to be installed. But actually, well, the way they get around it is there's nothing that needs to be installed. They just have a Git repository, and it just gets added as an entry in the lib. But that wouldn't work very well if there were any XS or C modules as part of that, because there'd have to be some sort of installation step to make that work. So we're probably just looking out that everything's all pure Perl here. But I know that's not the case in other places where people have local modules that have to have some non-C parts or not, it should be non-pure Perl parts, and be able to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I got around it, because I didn't have permission to run a local CPAN mirror or customize things where I work, I actually had to create binaries and ship the binaries out to all the servers. That way I knew I had all the exact modules I wanted. I didn't have to worry necessarily about, oh, this server is running Perl 4, which we had a lot of servers at that time running Perl 4. So I actually had to package things up. Yeah, exactly. Ooh. I had to package things up as a binary, but that meant I had this huge file I had to ship around everywhere. And that wasn't ideal either, but it made things work. Now with Perl Critic, at least part of those solving problems, or not Perl Critic, Pinto. Yeah. At least part of those problems could be solved.
Great, great, cool. And just to continue on, I don't know if we mentioned it in the show, but Pinto is in the CPAN. So you just use your normal CPAN installer to install Pinto, and then you start using Pinto. There's a great tutorial. The documentation is actually really good on it. I went through that this morning while prepping for the show. So once you install Pinto, then of course you then point your installer at the Pinto installation instead. So it becomes sort of the thing that bootstraps itself out of existence. So it sounds pretty good. And I think that's enough on that. Let's go ahead and look at what's coming up. You know, I am so excited for next week's show. The bacon is back. We're bringing back the bacon. This show needs more bacon. And in fact, it's John O'Bacon, who used to be the co-host for this show and has been a guest a few times, both before and since his co-host did. He is a guest once again. No, he's not coming back as a co-host. He's a guest once again. He's going to be talking about the Ubuntu phone, which is putting Ubuntu on the phone system on some sort of platform, I guess. We'll find out. I guess when he'll come on, he'll talk all about it. So there we go. Following that, we have Poodle, which is online translation. Hopefully they will come on and not cancel for the third time. Weblate, immediately following that, is also about online translation. So we're going to have two shows back-to-back that are roughly the same thing. You can contrast, compare, or just ignore us for 2 weeks. It's fine. It's okay. We're not. Our feelings aren't hurt if you don't listen to those shows. I shouldn't say that. It's probably great stuff. A lot of people need translation. So I'm silly because I only speak English and a little bit of Spanish. But other people, hey, they speak more languages than I do. It's really nice. And then another show I'm really excited. We just added this to schedule last week. I think it was CEPH, CEPH. Actually, Aaron, why don't you describe it? You can probably describe it better than I can.
Yeah, sure. So CEPH is a I won't say it's a file system, it's an ecosystem really, but it allows you to deploy network file systems as well, a distributed network file system, so over many nodes. It also lets you do object storage, so people that want to roll out their own private or public clouds could use CEPH on the back end as an alternative to OpenStack or any of the other ones that are out there. So it's it has some similarities to other things that are on the market, but it's open source, it's extremely powerful, and it should be a good show.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to that as well. I'm still sending out mails for Q2 to try to fill the rest of it. Probably get some more emails out this weekend and hopefully fill a few more slots before we get close to the CEPH show. If you want to see my progress on that, you can go to twit.tv/floss. That's our homepage for the show, and subscribe to the show from there. Or you can also check out the spreadsheet. I have a Google spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet that is linked from there that has all the people, that's the current schedule, our open slots, all the people on what I call the short list. These are people I'm sending email to actually get them on the show because they've already agreed to. We're just looking for the date. And also the longer list of people that we have considered to put on the show, but we haven't actually contacted them, or I'm missing an address for them or something. But the short list is really the active people. Those are people who are going to get slotted the first. So if you want your project or one of the projects you're familiar with to get on that short list, the fastest way to get to the top of that short list is to have the project leader email me, merlin@stoneninja.com, and I will put them right at the very top of that short list, and they get the first notification. Because I figure if it's hot enough for them to be emailing me, I want to contact them first. Because some of the ones that I contacted a year ago, I think are forgetting that I even have email coming out. So you can follow us at Floss Weekly on Google+. I announce all the shows as I add them. You can also follow us on Floss Weekly on Identica and Twitter. Not very active on any of those three, but as I get new people added to the show, I do announce it, and I don't really discuss anything there, so it's just mostly an announcement. It says platform for all those. We have a live chat room. We had a couple questions from there, although we kind of zipped right by them. I'm sorry about that. It's at live.twit.tv. We tape this show at 8:30 a.m. on Pacific time, Wednesdays. Pacific time, U.S. West Coast, basically. So America/Los Angeles, if you're doing it the complex Olsen way. You can follow me at Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N, on Twitter. I'm pretty active there, but I'm even more active on Google+, and that's Randall L. Schwartz on Google+. I got about 21,000 followers now, which is really handy. If you've been following me in those places, you'd know that I just came back from South America a couple weeks ago, and I'm mostly in LA these days, and the tweets and the Google+ followings actually announce all that. You'll also find out that I have been very successful at losing weight on my low-carb, high-fat plan. If you're curious about the details of that, I know sometimes in the chat room people are always like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? How do you lose the weight? Or I get follow-ups to the show like that. Well, I tell you, I recorded a nice 45-minute interview with Tony Smith, who also runs the Starship Sofa podcast, but he has a new podcast called Technically Fit and Healthy. The URL is technicallyfitandhealthy.com. That show should actually air today. So if you subscribe from there today, as we're taping this on the 27th of March, that show should also come out today, like later today. So it was a good interview. I had fun. He invited me back. So I'm definitely going to be talking more about what I've been doing to lower my blood pressure, reduce my waist size, and peel off a ton of weight and look younger. I mean, if you guys have been watching the video, I'm not the same guy I was 6 months ago. So go check it out there. Also, I taped a show with Thomas Ferris Nicolaisen for getminutes.com. Getminutes.com is the URL to subscribe and find out more about the show. I went on over the whole early history of Git and how I got involved from like the second month onward, including how I got Linus Torvalds to appear as a command performance during my first performance of my Git talk, which was really amazing. The whole story's in there. Go check that out. Subscribe to that show if you're a Git aficionado, and check that out. That's enough plugging for me. What's coming up for you, Aaron?
If people want to follow me, they can go to Google+. You can go to any social network, actually. Facebook, Twitter, I'm on all of them at Aaron Newcomb. Google Plus is the best way to interact with me. If you want to have a conversation, we can start a hangout, whatever. I love Google Plus. I'm not quite up to 20,000 followers. I've got about, 4,000, 5,000 followers. So add me to your circles on Google Plus and start a conversation with. I'd love to chat with people, and occasionally you bump into people at conferences, say, oh, I love Floss Weekly, glad to see you. And you can do that virtually on Google+, so go check it out.
Cool. And Aaron, I also want to thank you for stepping in at the last minute. We had Randy Harper was originally scheduled to be the co-host for this show, and at the last minute she had to bow out. But that's why I have a rotating panel of co-hosts, so you guys can all kind of take this stuff on. And I appreciate you stepping up to do this show for me. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Yeah, no problem. Always willing to be on the show.
Very good. And we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.